Howdy. Let's start with this little slideshow video thing. We are going to talking about the auroras, sulfur within the auroras. And that's a screenshot from a presentation I made at the Brainstorm with Ben Hyde and Matt Finn some time ago, where I have been talking about the sulfur or the let's go back to this. Is the composition of CMEs an underrated factor? What has sulfur to do with all of that, if anything? And that's yet another screenshot from the Brainstorm. It has been about a half a year ago. So now let's hop over to the original presentation I made for that podcast. Now let's just have a quick look. That's the picture I just watched. And I've been talking about the importance of the composition of the CME, because this is what people generally look on. We have the BC, the phi angle, the density, the speed, and the temperature. Yeah, and I think the density is not only about the density itself, it's also about what the density made of. And in my paper, Plate Tectonic Issues, the Influence of Electricity in Rock-Forming Processes and the Coherent Connection Between Science, Mythology and History of Finland, Part 2, which got published in the year 2023, I've been theorizing that Earth's magnetosphere is a byproduct of the energy confined within the plasmoid at the center of Earth. In other words, when the energy input suddenly decreases, the magnetosphere will shrink in size, and therefore all the other layers of Earth's atmospheric layers would get thinner too. It might be even so that the numerical amount of these layers shrink, let's say from 5 to only 3. Such a massive change in Earth's atmosphere would quite likely lead to very bad weather. A similar phenomenon can be observed in the Sapphire experiment, which we can see here. That's the Sapphire experiment. That's a little insert of Earth's atmospheric layers. That would mean that the actual height of the lower part of the aurora display becomes much less or even touches the ground. Not only do we have to take into account cyclical events like the sun cycles, we need to remember that also other events could have had similar effect on Earth's electrical circuitry. These other events are cosmic encounters with other planetary bodies, which are part of a reconfiguration of the solar system. Immanuel Velikovsky describes in his work how people all around the world were afraid of the planets which were the gods, like Venus, from where we get all the sulfur. Not all the sulfur, but quite much of the sulfur. I think Venus' close approach to Earth triggered the Bronze Age. And after that, we had Mars, which had close approaches, and we had the Iron Age. So, in this paper, I was theorizing that Earth's atmospheric layers, not only the thickness of them, but also the amount, can vary and will vary. And it turned out that a year later, they published this paper, Long-Term Oscillation and Trends of the Mesosphere, derived from 60 years of standard phase height measurements over Europe. An update, 2024. That's from the paper, and they noticed that it was shrinking about 300 meters. The LF reflection height, the region, subsidence 700 meters. The stratosphere subsidence 400 meters. So obviously, my theory about Earth's layers of the atmosphere experiencing fluctuations in height seems to be verified. And also for all of those who haven't seen my podcast, we just go quickly over the slides I presented in the podcast. So we have a higher atmospheric height at the equator and a lower one at the poles. And for those who know that we have a huge bulge in the oceans where we have higher waters, so to say. There's a bulge of water at the equators, but it's not only the water. They try to explain the water bulge with the spinning of the Earth. But apparently, it's also the atmosphere. And we have sulfur in the solar wind. So it's not only Venus, which is a huge sulfur ball. Solar wind and meteoritic matter originate from the same nebula. Yeah. Which is plasma. That's from the same paper, the Astrophysical Journal. Here we have the sulfur. And these are CMEs, I think, here, which are marked, and we have a spike in sulfur. And also, we are talking here about conduction mode laser spot welding, which is just another form of electromagnetic discharges. And apparently, if you just have a little bit of sulfur, 42 parts per million, it creates this kind of a pattern, a very shallow pond or whatever discharge crater you want to call it. And if you increase it to 140 parts per million, the surface is smooth, but it gets very deep. And we have to remember that electromagnetic discharge events are scalable. So, this is just a little recap of the podcast. Here, I will put a link below. You can check the whole podcast. It takes only 2.5 hours to make a little recap. What to do? Somewhere you got to start, you know. So now, why I bring this up? Let's put this on bigger screen. Geophysical Research Letters. Special Collection. Space Weather Events of 2024. Yeah, so that's rather new. That's from the May 2024 solar superstorm. I think it was the Mother's Day storm, probably. Surface air enrichment of cosmogenic sulfur at a subtropical site during the May 2024 superstorm. Cosmogenic radiosulfur is produced in the atmosphere by high-energy particle interactions and serves as a sensitive tracer of stratospheric intrusions. In May 2024, an extreme solar storm provided a rare opportunity to examine atmospheric sulfur response to intense solar activity. So this video might get rather long, so we won't read the whole thing. I marked here some of the key things. So this is published in 2026. So that's rather new. The most direct and common explanation for elevated sulfur concentrations at the surface is the intrusion of stratospheric air to the troposphere. Okay? Intrusion of stratospheric air to the troposphere. Stratosphere, troposphere. So it comes down, right? So we might assume that the origin of the sulfur is from the sun itself. Like I just showed you in this other picture, sulfur abundance in the solar wind. Stratospheric intrusion into the troposphere. Yeah, it comes from the top down. So in other words, the composition of the CMEs, the chemical composition of the CMEs might be much more important than many people think. And that's again from the same paper, this new one, given that typical SO2, sulfur dioxide, concentrations in middle latitude troposphere are less than 200 atoms per cubic meter. Even assuming a short sulfur oxidation lifetime of less than a day, accelerated oxidation alone without additional sulfur production cannot account for the full magnitude of the observed sulfur enrichment, more than 500 atoms per cubic meter. We therefore argue that enhanced sulfur production triggered by the solar storm remains the most plausible explanation for the observed enrichment. Let's go back to this other slide quickly. Determination of sulfur abundance in the solar wind. Is the composition of CMEs an underrated factor? What has sulfur to do with all that, if anything? Apparently, quite a lot. Let's just read a little bit. If the May 2024 solar superstorm had substantially enhanced cosmogenic radionuclide production in Earth's atmosphere, similar signals would be expected globally and across multiple cosmogenic radionuclide systems. So, in a way, they think that the sulfur gets created by Earth or Earth's atmosphere, which is somehow strange. Don't they know that there is sulfur in the solar wind? I don't know. This is the summary of, or partially, of this paper. Instead, they are best explained by enhanced atmospheric sulfur production driven by the Mother's Day storm, which is a series of intense solar events including extreme solar flares and geomagnetic disturbances. Extreme solar flares. Solar flares, it's basically quote-unquote just light. But we are talking about CMEs, coronal mass ejections. It's mass material, sulfur. And it might accumulate at the equator or in specific regions. That's maybe the reason why they only found it in certain regions. And it came from above and it made its way downwards. So its origin might be the sun after all, the CME itself. Yeah, somehow, to me, this paper seems to be a rather good confirmation of my theory that the composition or the chemical composition of the CMEs is probably much more important than many people think. And it might also explain this mystery, what they are trying to figure out here. What's going on with the sulfur? Yeah, it came from above and it penetrated its way down. So let's go on to the next theme. That's a video, maps, springs, volcanoes and quakes, Ivel, Vatican, Iceland, Russia. Let's check out quickly this video, which is some time old. Yeah, we are watching it on Duck Player. Otherwise, we would suffer from commercial stuff like this. Now, let's just have a quick listen into this. That's maybe some 3 years old or something. So let's go quickly over. Wait a second. I have to probably put off the speaker. I don't know which works better. Now we don't have any sound.
To Rome. Rome, Italia. Some of you might heard of. We have the Vatican, Orti Vaticani, Vatican City. And there has been some talk some time ago with some viewer about the actual Vatican City. I think it could be built on a volcano. And one thing we would somehow expect in order to be like that there would be water and maybe even a hill, and maybe even water on top of a hill. And not only do we have a nice star fortress here and many other stuff, since this Rome is historically rather important. And we are watching a satellite picture of Vatican City. And for some reason I ended up here. And check it out what happens when I push on the terrain button. Not only does it seem that this is a hill, and there is also a water body. Fontana del Aquilone. So it's a spring. You wouldn't somehow see this without terrain adjustment. Fontana del Aquilone. So now let's go over to Rome. Esch-sur-Alzette. I have been there. Huh? Well, but anyway, let's see if we can find Rome, and then we just zoom into this fountain. Where is it? Maybe this is Vatican City. And here is the fountain, Fontana del Aquilone. Now let's have a look at that. Yeah. There seems to be calcium-rich material pouring out of the ground, releasing SO2 probably, and it makes the rocks in a way grow. And I would call this rather volcanic activity looking like thing. So it might be correct after all that Vatican is built on top of a volcano.
So now let's go quickly back to this one picture. I want to point out that there are several mosses that are uh, heavily related to water springs. And I actually said the wrong thing. I said SO2. It's CO2, which gets released by this kind of water, and it depletes calcium, and it makes somehow the whole thing grow. And wherever you find this kind of a water spring that has greenery around it, these kind of mosses, there are different kinds of mosses. It indicates that we are looking at on artesian water, meaning water is coming out of the ground. And I have been talking about this many times, made some 360 or more videos about this whole topic, about water springs basically being volcanic features, especially where we have this kind of special water. And I also have this one paper published which carries the name Mountain Water, which is about the same topic. So now we just took a quick glimpse on this video, which has been some 3 years old. Now, mini volcano pops up in Rome. I think I have it somewhere open here. Yeah, this slideshow is basically my script for the video. Euronews. Mini volcano pops up in Rome. The geyser-like vent, which is nearly 2 meters wide, opened up and started shooting out steam and mud over the weekend. Since then, scientists have begun studying the hole, labeling it a fumarole, an opening in the Earth's crust. The nearest volcanic activity is more than 12 miles southeast of Rome, where the latest volcanic activity was some 20,000 years ago. So one might ask that, how is it? How old is this? 2013, so that's 13 years old. Now that's all the knowledge we have. And this one little picture. A small volcano vent has suddenly appeared near Rome's international Fiumicino airport. Yeah. So we have mud and steam. Yeah, steam is water. It's just hot, but it's water. Basically, exactly what I explained here with this spring in Vatican City. Imagine if there would be just all of a sudden gushing out a whole lot more water, and after a while the water maybe gets warmer or even hot and very dirty. We might look at a mud volcano in Vatican City. Now let's just click on this quickly. When was this made? 3 years ago. So now let me show you something else. Another YouTube video, which is even older. Static in the attic. Let me show his channel. This is what I feared. And during some commercials,
The Vatican Necropolis lies under the Vatican City at a depth varying between 5 and 12 meters, so almost 40 feet below modern level. The Vatican sponsored archaeological excavations, also known by their Italian name Scavi, under St. Peter's in the years 1940 to 1949, which revealed parts of a necropolis dating to imperial times. The work was undertaken at the request of Pope Pius XI, who wished to be buried as close to...
Imagine.
No, we don't imagine. But apparently, my claim that the Vatican is built on a volcano seems to be confirmed by this. Mudflood. Necropolis, 40 feet below Vatican City. That's a 5 years old video. If I only would have known this back in the day when I wrote my mountain water paper. Yeah. This would have definitely made it into the paper. Mini volcano pops up in Rome, where we have Vatican City. Now let's go on to the mountain water paper itself. Let's click on a bigger screen. 2023, it got released. A new approach to mountain forming volcanism, glaciers, and the role of water in an electric environment. That's from the paper. And that's the peer-reviewed version of this paper, in which this part got like a little bit, or much shorter, because I was writing much more about that. But anyway, the same principle applies, at least to some degrees, to the locality of sacred places, which are often buried by churches. Because back in the days, if you have a church and you are living there as a priest or whatever, and someone comes around there and wants to join the church, you need to have the possibility to baptize the individual. And in order to be able to baptize the individual, you need water. And the priest can make out of just basic water, it makes it holy. And after you get baptized, you are part of the church. So they tried all the time to get as much people joining their church. So they had to ensure that they had at least water. Otherwise, they cannot baptize, and people have to walk on. This is basically what I try to explain with this little sentence, that it was very, very important for the church to have water. And I found this Wasserwiki, Frankreichs Ritualquellen, Heilige Brunnen und Heilwässer. Obviously, this is a German page, and this got translated by Google or some computer. Many of the springs were already used by the Romans, who completely occupied the region during the Gallic Wars. Yeah, we are talking about France, apparently. during the Gallic Wars, bringing it writing and a highly developed system of hydraulic engineering, of which numerous relics still bear witness today. Yeah, we will take a quick look at this page, but this is the translated version of a part of it, which I think it's very interesting. In religious matters, the occupiers were pragmatic and the Celts were able to continue their traditional rituals at the springs. Over time, the cults merged into a Gallo-Roman conglomerate, which, after centuries of arduous struggle, finally had to give way to Christianity. With the fall of the Roman Empire, the use of the healing springs almost completely ceased, and the cults at the ritual springs retreated into obscurity because they were condemned by the Church as pagan practices. Consequently, the following period is poorly documented. It was only in the 12th century that the Church finally gave water a Christian interpretation and channeled the veneration of springs into the form of Christian miracle healings. In the following centuries, the clergy in many places became secularized. The buying and selling of offices, the sale of indulgences, and the veneration of saints and relics, belief in miracles, and pilgrimages all contributed to the Reformation. Unlike in Germany, where most of these customs disappeared permanently in the reformed small states, Calvinism did not prevail in France in the long term. The old customs were deeply rooted, especially among the rural population, so they soon revived even in areas that had been reformed in the meantime. Actually, we have to. Where is it? Is it this one? No. Here it is. So these are some of the holy springs originally founded by some so-called pagans. And here actually somewhere they say yeah, actually we may have a look at this because that's the German version and that's the translated version. A first overview for those in a hurry. Those interested in ritual sources and healing water, anyone interested quickly arrives at France. The country, due to its hydrological conditions, about numerous natural thermal and mineral springs that were used therapeutically in over 100 spa towns during the heyday of European spa culture, 18th to early 20th century. Many of them still bear the suffix Le Bain, Bagnères de, or Termes in their name. Yeah, so if you are interested into water, you need it. Probably it's always helpful to figure out what specific things are called in specific languages or in the specific language in the country you are looking for things. Like many place names, they already expose the origin, not only of the name, but why there is a town or a village or a church in the first place. But anyway, also the corporations Danone and Nestle have repeatedly made headlines with their mineral waters and batches of Volvic and Perrier. Despite having to withdraw, the French mineral water industry occupies a leading position in Europe. Many of the springs were already used by the Romans, who completely occupied the region during the Gallic Wars. So this we have seen already. With rural exodus, the increasing access to modern medicine for the rural population, and the decline of superstition and religious practices, interest in the ancient miraculous springs waned, much like the lavoir wash houses in the villages where women had washed communally. The miraculous springs fell into disuse in the 1950s and threatened to be forgotten. Fortunately, many regions subsequently rediscovered their cultural heritage, and even remote communities wanted to preserve their sacred springs, washhouses, and historical sites. Spring to participate in the burgeoning tourism industry. Finally, the internet made extensive, but there has been somewhere written, that's why I made this in the first place, this translation. Maybe it's coming in the next chapter. Interest in water and holy springs has increased throughout Europe over the last few decades. In France, it's now almost more vibrant than in the Catholic areas of the Alpine regions. Article on holy springs in Upper Australia. No, Austria. Yeah, we go to Australia in a short moment. Yeah, anyway, I thought there's somewhere they were writing down that they were actually building churches on top of those holy places or pagan places in order to keep the pagans away from them and make the users Christian, which I found very interesting. Seems to confirm what I tried to explain here in my own paper. But now we go to Australia. There has been an earthquake, maybe 2 days ago or something, a 5.5. It made the news. And there has been some small aftershocks too, 3.6, 3.4. So I took the coordinates and went over to Google Earth. Actually, this is Italy. Yeah, I made something else in the meanwhile. Actually, I plotted some of the earthquakes of Italy recently. Explore Earth. And now we go over to here. Take the location and take a look, because I found something in Australia. Not only did it turn out that this quake is very close to Uluru, 60 miles or something, or 60 kilometers to Uluru. Let's put everything on. Uluru. Yeah. Water hole. Mountain water, once again. Whether this is a piece from Mars or something else, we have the water. So where is our quake? Here. So I've been looking at this, and for those who have been watching my channel, you know I am looking for water. Other people are watching for power lines and stuff like this, but I'm about the water because I think water veins and water bodies are the power lines of Earth, and there seems to be something. And we are somewhere far out in the outback. There is no one here. There are no pictures or whatsoever. But if we go to the west, maybe we have to zoom out a little bit. I found this one. Check this out. That's a perfect triangle. Let's just measure from here to here. 3,500 meters. And maybe it's a bit longer, but it's not. It's a perfect triangle. Maybe some Y circuitry, delta circuitry, whatever circuitry, indicating probably some of the electrical discharge that formed this area. Perfect triangle in the middle of nowhere. With some round shapes as well. And since we have some greenery, we might also have to expect that there's some water down there. Maybe not too much. So anyway, that's basically this little video. So for anyone who still is thinking about the Mudflood mystery, yes, it's the mountain water. It's the mud volcanoes. It's the water springs. It's the mud that comes out of the ground, which might be triggered by strong solar activity. Nowadays, back in the days, it might have been Mars, Venus, Saturn, or whatever big changes in Earth's electric or magnetic environment. As the water gets pulled up in the sky, it gets pulled down to the ground. As I have been explaining in my other or more recent video that you can find here somewhere, this one. Howdy. The mud volcanoes and salt lakes. Now let's watch it first with normal speed. There is no sound to it. Here you can see how the water starts to react to a very strong electromagnetic field. Here's basically the same thing again, a little bit scaled up. Here we can see how the water follows the electricity. Yes. As the water follows the electricity, for example, telluric currents, yeah, it might pull dirt with it as well. And we get mud volcanoes. And like I just showed you, like a random mud volcano pops up in the middle of Rome. These kinds of events might happen in many, many, many places. For most in rather unexpected places. And as the water starts to rise, the mud comes as well. And as I have been explaining in other videos, clay, which is basically the mud, clay and lava is about the same material. Lava is a bit different because it doesn't contain water, and also the heat might alter some of the material, but it's more or less the same material. So in other words, strong geomagnetic storms could trigger mud volcano eruptions that could create mud floods. It's actually very simple after all. Where do we have this? Yeah. Mudflood, Necropolis, Vatican City. For example, mini volcano pops up in Rome. Then we just watched this big spring in Vatican City. So, to me, the mud flood mystery is solved. It has been solved for a long time. I just didn't really manage to make a video about this. Maybe it's probably not only this is not a mud flood video, but for those who made it until here, you probably understand what's the thing about the mud floods. The water follows the electricity and the mud follows the water. It's very simple, after all. Yeah, okay, I think I leave it here. We have the sulfur in the solar wind, mud volcanoes in Rome, mud floods, the holy springs. I forgot now, let's just have a quick look at because there are like many interesting, like these water springs in France, for example. Let's just have a quick look at some of these. We have the dragons. What a surprise, the dragon is representing electricity. We have the water that follows the electricity. We have the Kars region, very calcareous rich, and we have the mosses here, as we have in the Vatican, spring, Fontana dell'Aquilone. They are still having rituals or like praying to the gods of the springs in France. I will put links to all these sources. You can go there and take a look on your own pace. Yet another spring. We have an iron spring. Apparently there must be, every now and then there's much more water coming out. I have been making some excursions here in the region. I found many interesting things. Iron wells in the middle of the forest. More water. And you just can imagine if you find a very old church, if some of you lives in France or Central Europe or wherever, probably Central Europe might be a better place than here in Finland, for example. But if you go to a big church, an old church, and there's someone working there, you might ask if there's any possibility if you could go downstairs, if there's a cellar, and just have a look around and look for water. I'm pretty sure in many old churches, this seems to be a church and there's the water well here visible. In many churches it might be hidden beneath the floor. Yeah, witches. Yeah, somehow it turned out that I seem to be a witch. It wasn't intended, but the evidence suggests I'm a witch. Yeah, that's yet another well, and you can find these odd structures all over Europe, Greece, and wherever. Yeah, there's a witch, check it out. Is there any more pictures? Fontana petrificante de Reautier. Yeah, let's end it with this. Like I said, where we have very calcious rich water coming out of the ground, it releases CO2 and the chalk, let's say like this, the calcium gets depleted. Here we don't have too many mosses because it might be that there is like this yellow stuff might be sulfur and the mosses maybe don't really like the sulfur, so that's why it's not that green. But where we don't have much sulfur, we have the mosses and also other plants Maybe algae as well, which are just mosses in the water. Yeah, like here in this picture, there's green, there's moss on the ceiling, and here's moss in the background as well. But anyway, I think that's it for now. Thanks.